So I'll briefly tell you about the acceptability judgments, especially the way they're used in research in morphophonology and morphosyntax. And just as an intro, we will first go over some really general classifications of the types of studies basically that you get in data collection. So the first classification that we'll look at is the one between online and offline data collection. And that has nothing to do with the internet, so as will become clear in a second. Then we will discuss the distinction between performance and judgment tasks. And then we'll focus on acceptability data collection, and there look at the difference between informal and formal data collection, in order to kind of prepare the ground for looking at some specific tasks that you can use for your data collection in your studies that you will design yourself. So basically what comes afterwards is something that we'll cover in the next presentation, so the specific tasks. Okay, the distinction between online and offline methods of data collection. Essentially, online means in real time. So if you imagine a study where you expose your speakers, your subjects to a text, and you ask them to read it, and they read it and you follow their eye movements or something like that, that is basically observing language behavior in real time, and that is a very clear example of an online study. In an offline study, you either require or allow for more reflections. So you can in a social linguistic interview, you typically ask the question, and the speakers can take their time and think about it. They can come back to it later. They can realize certain things. So it's much less, let's say, controlled in the sense that it has to be in real time and somehow the same for everyone. A related classification that is, however, not the same classification is the distinction between performance and judgment tasks. So this is really about what you ask your speakers to do, what kind of task they need to complete. And in a performance task, you usually ask, or you always ask speakers to do some language, to either produce or process some language, and then do something with the data obtained with what they did, or what happened with their eyes in their brain. So it doesn't really necessarily have to be something that they actively did. In a judgment task, it's a different kind of phenomenon that you're targeting, because you're targeting their perception of acceptability of a certain linguistic item as acceptable or non-acceptable. So basically, right, you're asking or exposing your people to your subjects to a sentence or to a word, and you ask them, is this a good word? Is this an acceptable word of your language, or an acceptable sentence of your language? The examples, so basically on the left-hand side you can see a picture from the Frog Story, a collection of basically drawings that are used as stimuli very often to just elicit linguistic production. You ask people to describe what's happening in the pictures. So that would be a very clear case of a performance task. Whereas in a judgment task, so on the right hand side, you ask people, how acceptable does the word in caps sound in your English? And then you give them a sentence, and you put the word stupidness in caps, and they have to tell you how well it sounds from totally unacceptable to totally acceptable. So very different kind of task that they have to perform. We'll be focusing on acceptability judgment data today. So just to be sure, they can be either online or offline. You can imagine, for instance, an offline study which can totally take place on internet, where you ask people on a social network. So this is a fake post that I produced. how would you rate the word validness from 1 to 10? And then if validity is 10. And then you get all kinds of answers, but people have all the time in the world to think, change their mind, change their answer, read what other people said. That's another issue, but that makes it all a very offline task. On the other hand, you can put people in front of a computer, and then everything they can see is this, what you see on the right hand side. So there's the word validness, and if this is a word, you have to press Y. If it's not, you have to press N, and you have 2 seconds. That's very real time. That's very online. And now I promised the last classification that we will cover. That again does not really is not really the same as the other two. Is the one between informal and formal data collection. And we use this word the way we usually use it. So basically, informal means without a clear setup. So imagining collecting data just by asking around, the way I did on Facebook in this fake post. Whereas formal data collection is I expose everyone to exactly the same experimental setting as you saw in the task that was on that was next to the fake post. So what we get then is that in informal data collection you very often get variable sample sizes. So some speakers, here there was one item, so it was very hard to provide an answer without answering that question. But if I give 5 items and then some people respond, some don't to all the items, or I get I'm literally asking around. So sometimes I have a lot of time, so I ask people a lot of words, and sometimes I don't. So I get only 2 answers. All of this is something that you just need to accept if you're just asking around. In a formal setting, you can control the sample size. You can decide that every speaker has to respond to 30 items or something like that. In an informal, so the other thing related is different speakers, different tokens. Again, if I'm asking around, I might have I might think of different examples with different people. I might forget to mention some of the examples that I want, and then I will get basically a different kind of sample now, not only size but also different kind of sample from everyone. Whereas in a formal data collection, again, this is something that you kind of pre-program, so that is unified. Finally, when it comes to the responses, the researcher typically codes the responses herself in an informal data collection. What does this mean? If I ask people how a word sounds, and they say, one speaker says it sounds really funny, and the other one says it sounds really strange, I will have to do something. I would have to put it on a scale or somehow else code it as an answer in order to make my data comparable. In a formal setting, you typically resolve this by already asking people to answer on a scale from 1 to 5, and then, as we'll discuss in the next presentation, then you hope that all the people perceive the scale the same, but you don't have to code. You don't have to make any coding decisions when you are processing your collected data. Okay, what's the role of these two in real life of a researcher? So informal acceptability data collection is something that is still part of real life research. So it's the usual source of data in linguistic work that does not tell you, how the data was obtained. If someone says, in this language we say this way, and this is good, this is bad, usually it means they are a speaker, they ask a couple of speakers typically, and that's it. That's how they collected these data. It is a method that is losing popularity in recent years as the only source. So people are increasingly asking for more formally obtained data. But it is still widely used, and it's also useful. I wanted to emphasize this. It's also useful for preliminary insight into qualitative differences. You really want to, if you have an intuition that there is some distinction between two kinds of words in a language, you really want to ask around first to get a kind of a feel of what's going on. But then you ideally want to also construct a formal study and set up a formal study and collect your data formally. So formal acceptability data collection, increasingly popular. It guarantees replicability. I think that's a key word here. So if I describe how I obtain my data in let's say a town somewhere, and someone else does the same, the hope is that if everything went right, they will obtain the same result, and that is kind of impossible with informal data collection. Formal data collection also makes data management and sharing much easier. So it's much easier to kind of share your put your responses in a table and share them with the world. And it allows for more sophisticated data analysis. It allows you to, as previously discussed, if you have this scale that allows you to process these judgments much better than if everyone needed to describe how they feel about a word, and some of them did a scale, some of them did a one-word answer, and some of them wrote an essay about how they feel about this word. Okay, we'll basically turn to some specific tasks, but there are some things that kind of need to be in place before you even start doing your data collection. So this is something that is kind of parts of general research design that have to be in place before you start designing your data collection tools. So what should be clear is your research question and your hypothesis. So what are you trying to confirm or disprove? Here, what is the specific question? What are the variables? What is influencing what, or correlating with what? And how do you measure that? That's what the variable type kind of tells you. You need to be clear on your sample size, how many data points you want to collect, and you need to be clear on the kinds of statistics that you want to apply to your results.